In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, shares of Lyft hit an all-time low just weeks after making its public debut. Does this signal more risk for other IPOs coming to market? Plus, it's been a massive legal fight spanning the globe for years. Now, Apple and Qualcomm will argue their cases in court, where Apple CEO Tim Cook is expected to testify. And with a deadline for an agreement with the SEC closing in, Elon Musk continues to tweet production details. The Tesla CEO says the car maker will make over 500,000 vehicles in the next 12 months. But first to our top story, Lyft shares hit an all-time low Monday as the ride-hailer's post-IPO rout continues. The stock has now declined in 7 of its 12 trading days since going public last month, falling as much as 22% below its IPO price. This after rival Uber filed for its own IPO just last week. Could Lyft's slow start be a warning to other unicorns headed to the public market? Joining us to discuss, Bloomberg's Michael Heitha, and in Florida, we have University of Florida finance professor Jay Ritter. So Jay, you've been looking at some historical data on large IPOs and how they perform. How does Lyft compare?
With big companies like Lyft, sometimes they go up in the first 6 months, sometimes they go down. But rather surprisingly, those that drop a lot during the first 6 months, on average, outperform those that went up during the first 6 months. Most famously, Facebook dropped by over half after it went public before it went on a tear. And there's no guarantee that's going to happen with Lyft, but I see no reason to hit the panic button.
Facebook was a very individual case, though. There was a technical glitch with the NASDAQ that delayed the beginning of trading. I mean, what does Lyft have in common potentially with some of these other IPOs that go up and down? I mean, is there a common denominator?
Well, yes, and the common denominator is not trading glitches. It's big uncertainties about their future profitability. With Lyft and Uber, there's a huge amount of uncertainty about how big the market is going to be once autonomous vehicles take over, how long that's going to take, what the profit margins are going to be. I'm predicting that there will be a merger. Lyft might merge with Uber. Lyft might merge with, who knows, Alphabet might spin off Waymo, and Waymo and Lyft might merge. And what the terms of the merger are going to be is a big question mark.
That's something I have not heard before. I would assume they'd have to get over some sort of animosities between the two companies if Uber and Lyft were to merge. But Michael, with Uber filing to go public officially last week, how does what's happening with Lyft impact Uber?
Okay. I think Jay has a good point that what happens next is going to be unpredictable in so many ways.
But you're supposed to predict it for us.
Oh, yes. But I will go so and do ahead anyway. The specter hanging over all these IPOs right now to a certain extent is Snap. And while Jay makes a point that overall, if you perform not so well in your first 6 months, it doesn't necessarily predict what happens next. Snap is still there as a company that went public at $17 a share in 2017 in March, and it took till about last December to bottom out at about $5 a share. So there could be a decline ahead. It's not necessarily going to happen all at once. I think for Uber and for Lyft, what happens now is that Uber, by any accounts, must be watching very carefully every move of Lyft. And one of the most interesting things is that Lyft has been beset by short sellers now. And the short sellers are the ones making the profits on Lyft at the moment, at least, on the trades.
Snap has increased over the last several months, but it's still down below its initial offering price.
Yes, I think it's about $11 a share now compared to the 17 initially. Yeah.
Right. So Jay, looking forward, we've got Pinterest potentially coming this week. We've got Uber coming in the next couple of weeks, and then we've got a few more after that, potentially Slack in June or July, as we've reported. How would you expect the market dynamics that we're seeing now, the short positions on Lyft, to impact these coming IPOs?
I think a lot of these are going to be valued based upon the company's prospects. You know, Lyft is in a very different business than Pinterest or Snap. Lyft has a lot more under its own control because it's not dependent upon advertising revenue and the number of users. Lyft can determine the number of users with its pricing policy. You know, they can buy market share by incurring some short-term losses, but I think it's a very good strategy for them to buy market share to improve their future bargaining position.
Now, Michael, Pinterest has been finishing up its roadshow. We're expecting Pinterest to potentially go public this week. How do they fit into this stampede?
Okay. Pinterest is one of those long-standing companies which has sat on its private status for a long time. It is, in some ways, as Jay notes, very much a more old-school advertising financed model. So, to a certain extent at least. And so, it's pricing on Thursday. It's a second tier compared to Uber and Lyft. So, it'll be interesting to see if it sort of continues to draw on this enthusiasm for IPOs in general, or whether it kind of gets lost in the shuffle while everyone else is focusing on Lyft and Uber.
Zoom, the video conferencing company, also going public
yes,
this
Zoom,
week.
right.
So, you know, once Pinterest happens, once Uber happens, what happens after that? Is that the cresting of this wave? You know, will Slack, you know, be just another part of this?
Right. Almost by definition, because Uber is just going to have such a massive IPO, even on the short side of it. It's going to be a crest that's going to drop off a bit after that. But there are still lots of very interesting companies lined up, Slack being one. Other companies less often mentioned, Palantir, Peloton even. I think the one to really watch for is Airbnb in the long run, because by that time there will have been so much money that has gone into these tech-related IPOs by the time Airbnb, by all accounts, comes on. But then again, Airbnb has a very viable model and is a very well-known brand. And I think that will be the one that sort of keeps the whole ball rolling or shows that it's coming to a close, perhaps, depending on what happens.
All right, well, lots of work for you over the next weeks and months, and us, Michael Haitha for Bloomberg, and Jay Ritter, University of Florida professor. Thank you both so much for stopping by. Well, soon after a devastating fire engulfed Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris Monday, news outlets began streaming live broadcasts on YouTube. That led to several clips, including a box of text. The company introduced this text box feature last year to combat the spread of conspiracy theories, including those that question the 9/11 attacks. But YouTube software mistakenly labeled the plumes of smoke in Paris as footage from 2001. Triggering that text panel below the video. In a statement, a YouTube spokesperson said these panels are triggered algorithmically and our systems sometimes make the wrong call. We're disabling these panels for live streams related to the fire. Coming up, the Apple-Qualcomm legal showdown continues in federal court. Who's got more to lose? We'll give you the latest on this global fight next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Apple and Qualcomm have spent over 2 years fighting over patent licensing around the globe. Now, they're heading to court again. A trial has started in San Diego where a federal jury will decide if Qualcomm engaged in illegal patent licensing practices and whether Apple had the right to stop paying royalties for it. Both CEOs are expected to testify in the trial, which could last as long as 5 weeks. Joining us to discuss, Bloomberg's Ian King and Matt Larson, Vice President of Oceanic Ventures, which focuses on investment opportunities in late-stage private tech companies. He's also a former patent litigator and equity analyst focused on the impact of tech lawsuits on financial markets. So, Ian, first of all, set the stage for us. Jury selection has started in San Diego. What's next?
That's right. Yeah, we might even get the opening statements as early as today. But, you know, the stage is, this is the main event. This is kind of what we've been waiting for a couple of years. As you said, Qualcomm will find out whether it can force Apple basically to do what it said it should have done, which is get paid, and we're talking $7 billion, probably more at this point. On the flip side of this, we're going to have a jury decide whether Apple is right, whether Qualcomm has been naughty, basically whether they've been illegally forcing people to pay these inflated licensing fees.
Now, Matt, we've seen Apple have the upper hand, we've seen Qualcomm have the upper hand, we've seen different courts around the world rule in the other's favor. So who has the upper hand now?
When you get to a trial like this, it's really asking who has the upper hand in a coin flip, especially when you're going to a jury about patent licensing, antitrust questions. It's a 5-week jury trial on some things that can be pretty dry, frankly. So in the overall dispute, I tend to think that Qualcomm has a slight upper hand, but Apple has some strong arguments. Qualcomm is facing a lot of pressure, both from regulators, from kind of the licensing drought that they've been going through for the past couple of years. So the overall dispute has certainly taken a toll on Qualcomm's business, but I think that the licensing business will ultimately prevail. It's just a question of when.
Now, what's significant about this particular trial, Ian, is that we're expecting both Apple CEO Tim Cook and Qualcomm CEO Steve Mollenkopf to testify, right?
Right.
So how do we expect them to represent this in a public setting?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, as Matt said, this is in front of a jury, which takes it into a different level. Possibly there's going to be more theatrics. Possibly there's going to be like, this is the damage that's been done to us, an appeal to, the sympathy vote, if you like, of the jury, in what is very a dry topic. But ultimately, these are two very rich companies. One is obviously richer than the other, but they still, it's not going to bankrupt either one of them. So ultimately, the arguments they're going to have to make are really going to have to boil down to how palatable they can make technical, legal, and technology arguments accessible to average people.
So, Matt, Qualcomm is based in San Diego, but Apple is the biggest company in the world, and Tim Cook is a very recognizable person. How do we expect that to sway the jury?
Yeah, Qualcomm's definitely kind of a hometown hero, with the stadium being named after Qualcomm. It was interesting.
They changed the name now.
Yeah, they've changed the name now, but there's still some goodwill. It was interesting when you were, kind of following questions that they were asking the potential jurors. There's, some people who love Apple and own a bunch of their stocks. Some people have friends who've worked at Qualcomm and appreciate the technology. It's a balance. I think that Qualcomm is definitely going to try to take advantage of that hometown goodwill and illustrate themselves as an innovator that deserves to be paid. At this point we're talking less than $10 per iPhone. So when you're thinking about the era of the $1,000 iPhone, it doesn't seem that unreasonable to a juror, I don't think.
So I sat down with Steve Mollenkopf at the end of last year, and he said something that surprised me, which was that he still expects to work with Apple after this. Take a listen to what he told me then.
I think there's probably no better opportunity and partner for Qualcomm than to work with Apple. It makes sense that the technology leader in mobile should be partnered with the product leader in mobile. And those things tend to work out. But the way that we think about the business is eventually you get the disputes figured out and you move on into a different period. And I hope to be in that period according to the schedule we've already laid out.
Ian, what are the chances of these two companies working together after this? Bitterness.
You'd be surprised. So many times we see these knockdown, drag-out fights, Apple and Samsung, for example, and then all of a sudden you find Samsung parts in an iPhone. So particularly in this case, these are two companies which kind of really need each other. What Qualcomm is really good at is what Apple will, maybe next year, maybe the year after, need if its other suppliers can't close that gap with Qualcomm. That's part of what's going on here.
Is this showdown preventing Apple from moving to 5G because Qualcomm has the licensing, has the technology for 5G that Apple will need if it wants to move to 5G?
Yeah, Qualcomm is by and far the leader in terms of developing 5G-enabled chips in the U.S. Huawei is kind of the other counterpart. And from a global perspective, there was the drama about the potential Broadcom takeover and protection of Qualcomm over the concern that they're in the lead of research and development in this space. So is it actually slowing implementation of 5G? I think if you asked a network person that question, they would say, look, everything that's 5G now is kind of a false 5G, so we maybe have a generation or two of iPhone before it really would be impactful. So, I would give it maybe another year or two, and if the dispute moves on, then that might be the problem.
It's a bet that Apple have made before, and successfully. They were slow to 3G, they were slow to 4G, but it didn't matter because the networks didn't come in quickly enough for the other companies to cause them pain. this is arguably the bet they're making this time as well.
All right. Well, you'll both keep us posted, especially you, Ian. Thank you so much. Ian King for Bloomberg, Matt Larson, Oceanic Partners. Thank you so much for stopping by. Meantime, Foxconn has confirmed that it will begin mass production of the iPhone in India this year. Foxconn chair Terry Goh said that India's prime minister has invited him as the Taiwanese company plans its expansion in the country. While Apple has produced old phones in Bangalore for years, it will now expand manufacturing to more recent models. This as India becomes the fastest growing smartphone market in the world, while China stagnates and Apple loses share to local competitors like Huawei. Coming up later this month, consumers will finally be able to buy Samsung's foldable phone, and we got a sneak peek. Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network, TikTok. On Twitter, this is Bloomberg. The European Union is taking a closer look at Google's tax arrangement in Ireland. Bloomberg has learned that authorities want to know how Google uses operations there to help reduce its tax obligations within the EU. The bloc's rules limit tax perks provided by individual European governments. Well, it is one of Samsung's boldest devices to date. Earlier this year, the company unveiled the Galaxy Fold phone that can be a phone or a tablet with a price tag of nearly $2,000. Our own Mark Gurman got his hands on the device for a closer look.
Remember about 8 years ago when Samsung launched giant, expensive, high-end smartphones and there was a group of people that thought it was a gimmick? Well, Samsung is hoping that's going to happen again and also turn mainstream. That's the Galaxy Fold. This is a $2,000 foldable phone. You can run 3 applications at once. The user interface is fairly intuitive. It's not as consistent as I would like when flowing between the smaller screen outside the phone and the bigger 7.3-inch screen when you open it. But I have a feeling it's going to get better over time if Samsung continues to invest in this style of smartphone. When you open it up, it's basically a tablet. It's almost the size as an iPad mini, but it doesn't really have large bezels all around it. It has an in-screen fingerprint scanner like the latest phones. There's a 5G version coming for international markets. This one goes on sale at the end of April in the US on AT&T and T-Mobile. Comes in several colors, including this blue and gold color. There's a silver, there's a dark gray / black color. There's a green color that almost looks gold. Overall, productivity users and business users are probably going to like this thing for the multitasking. You're able to pin 3 applications next to each other at once. So for example, you could be watching a video while also looking through your calendar and taking notes. So overall, it's going to appeal to those types of users. But the $2,000 question is, are people really going to want to buy these things so soon after they hit the market, given the technology is still fairly early? I'm Mark Gurman for Bloomberg News in New York.
Well, Huawei's chief representative to the European Union, Abraham Liu, says allegations the telecom giant spies for China are not fair. This comes as the U.S. continues to expose and pressure its European allies to block the company's access to 5G networks. He spoke exclusively with Bloomberg's Maria Tadeo in Brussels.
This kind of groundless allegation, put the head as over our head as a Chinese spy or this kind of things. It's not fair, The trust has to be based on the facts, and the facts has to be verifiable, and this kind of verification has to be based on the common industrial, common standards, which is, equal to everybody. And we respect that in Europe you have the value of the non-discrimination, and we that is why, that is how Huawei has been, the environment we appreciated, worldwide in the past 30 years of development of Huawei. I think one of the success factors for Huawei is based on this kind of globalized, non-discrimination environment. We have been working very closely with the different operators in Germany, German market, and we have a lot of collaboration, ongoing collaboration with the Deutsche Telekom and as well as the other operators. I think if you talk about the 5G, 5G cybersecurity, I think this topic Germany has made a very good example of how a rational approach, how what is the right direction to go to actually address this kind of cybersecurity concern. We admit this is very important. We all agree that this is an important part, that digitalization has to be based on a safe network. But how to solve this problem, how to address this kind of concern from different stakeholders. I think Germany has set a benchmark or a kind of example, and we are part of the solution for that. The U.S. has been talking to us. There is the kind of reputation damage to Huawei, but on the other side, it has been. Someone has said it's kind of big advertisement to Huawei as well. So I give you an example. The first 2 months of Huawei business revenue has been increased by 30%. In fact, I think that even ourselves, many of our colleagues have never expected this, because at the beginning of the year, our annual budget is only increased about 20% annually. But the first 2 months, because due to the huge advertisement by the U.S., the big figures, talk about Huawei, talk about 5G. So our revenue has been increased. Many people began to notice Huawei. Why this private company, been continuously repeated by the U.S. Vice President, President, or Secretary of the State, and people, what is it they are talking about? They talk about cybersecurity. Then they check with their neighbor, check with their friends, bring their phone to check what is it. They notice that this phone is so nice, it's so, there are a lot of nice features. They also enjoy, they try, and then people share to each other. I think the credit was built, by years, by the, the reputation has been built in the past, tens of years. The political allegation can damage in a while, but I think for long run, we are still very confident for our future business development.
That was Huawei's chief representative to the European Union there, Abraham Liu. Coming up, Musk can't seem to help himself. Back to Twitter with another projection on Tesla output for the next 12 months, what this could mean for the company and his relationship with U.S. regulators next. And later, there are now 486 electric vehicle manufacturers registered in China, more than triple the number from 2 years ago. We're going to hear from the CFO of XPeng about demand in the region next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Well, Elon Musk has already been warned about his Twitter use, but that hasn't stopped him so far. Musk tweeted another Tesla production forecast, like the one that got him in trouble in the first place. He wrote that the company will build over 500,000 cars in the next year. A similar tweet led the SEC to argue he was in contempt of a settlement reached last year. Joining us to discuss, Bloomberg Craig Trudell, who covers Tesla for us. So, Craig, what exactly happened this time?
So this is, as you pointed out, very similar to a post that he sent in February. In that post, he said that the company was going to build about 500,000 cars this year. Around that time, the in-house securities lawyer at Tesla, who was sort of named to a position or hired as a result of a settlement with the SEC, reached out to Musk and sort of worked with him to quickly send out a follow-up tweet to sort of clean that first one up, because it was sort of inconsistent with past statements. There's a little bit of a sort of deeper story there where Musk himself sort of contradicted a written statement on an earnings call, but in any case, they tried to clean it up. The SEC very much took notice and reached out to Musk's lawyers, and we found ourselves in this contempt of court fight. For Musk to send this tweet over the weekend, it was very reminiscent of it. It also just, based on sort of context clues, didn't look like the sort of posts that maybe was run by a lawyer. It was sort of in passing and made in a reply to some person on Twitter. So it definitely sort of read as though Musk was doing something very similar, just sort of casually talking about how many cars Tesla is going to make. And the SEC has argued that's very much material information and something that he's supposed to get cleared with a lawyer within Tesla.
So, Craig, there's no question that Elon Musk likes to fly close to the sun, which is what many investors love about him. But technically, if the information is correct, is he allowed, per this agreement, to tweet about it?
Well, this is part of why the judge who's overseeing this case told both sides just within the last couple weeks to put their reasonableness pants on, and those were her words, to go back and revisit this agreement and sort of come to an agreement of what is and isn't material and what the sort of protocols are for Musk. Clearly, he does not like this agreement. He's wanted it changed. I think that's sort of come through in the ways in which he and his legal team have sort of reacted to the SEC, wanting to do battle over this again. And the problem with Musk is it probably isn't a good idea for him to go about taking issue with this agreement by basically doing the same thing that caused the SEC to get frustrated with him in the first place. The judge in this case set a deadline for this Thursday for the two parties to come together, meet for an hour, and at least an hour, and hash things out. And if they're not able to come to an agreement, the judge will make a ruling on whether or not Musk is in contempt and decide sort of what to do from there.
Meantime, there are real concerns, right, about deliveries. And Nikkei also reported that the company and Panasonic are freezing plans to extend capacity in the battery factory that they share in Nevada. What do we know about this?
Yeah, this was a report last week. Nikkei, obviously a very well-sourced publication in Japan, came out and said that these two companies were sort of putting expansion at Gigafactory on hold as a result of questions about just how much demand there is for electric vehicles, sort of the financials of this project. This is one where Panasonic spend a lot of money alongside Tesla to build this plant. It's a massive factory out in Nevada. And so it's raised some real questions about just sort of the relationship there. And so it's a really important one for both companies. And Tesla can sort of ill afford to have this relationship fall apart because of just how much they're sort of invested in one another. And interestingly, while Musk was tweeting away this weekend, he sort of hung Panasonic out to dry and said that their battery cell manufacturing lines at the Gigafactory were actually holding up production of Model 3 sedans, which is kind of an interesting claim, and also sort of is puzzling given the drop in deliveries that we've seen with Tesla. You would think that they're not having a problem with production lately. What they're having a problem with is demand.
Interesting. Well, we'll be watching to see how all of that unfolds. Bloomberg's Craig Trudell, thank you so much for stopping by. Well, meantime, Xpeng CFO Brian Gu says auto sales in China are seeing significant decline compared to electric cars. He also talked about Tesla in China and how China scrapping its subsidy to the industry could wipe out smaller players, something that he is not unhappy about. He spoke to Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie at the Shanghai Auto Show. Take a listen.
Overall tone is the subsidy will come down pretty significantly. We actually expected that. So as you remember that we announced the price increase as early as February to anticipate for the subsidy reduction. And we think it will have a short-term impact on the overall consumer demand, but in the long run, it actually will be good for the whole sector because subsidy itself is actually benefiting the low-end players, and actually getting rid of the subsidy or reducing subsidy forces consumer to focus on the product differentiation and quality and value proposition, which is something that we are emphasizing as well.
In terms of the shakeout of the electric vehicle startup sector here in China, how far is it going to go? What percentage of players do you think are going to be left in, say, 2 years' time?
I think the shakeup will happen pretty dramatically. I already witnessed since I joined Xpeng Motors about a year ago till today, the market is actually becoming very concentrated. People always talk about there's dozens or hundreds of players in this market. But today, if you look around, only probably a handful of players really getting the attention and really are developing products according to their schedules. Most of the players actually are fading away because this business actually requires a lot of resources, a lot of commitment. And I don't think people actually, most of the players will be able to attract the resources and talent and have the ability of building an organization to meet that requirement. And also going back to the subsidy question, the subsidy going away in the next 12 to 24 months or being dramatically reduced will have an impact on the players that's coming to market. These players will not have the window like what we had to access the market with the support of the government. So for them to have a product a year from today, they will be faced with a lot of competition and very small government support.
And we have to ask you about Tesla, because we always do, and of course they're building a factory outside of Shanghai. Is there a comparison to maybe between Tesla and Apple, for example, in terms of Apple's fortunes in the Chinese market, where customers have become more price conscious and they're looking more for domestic brands, and Apple has seen some of its sales fall off? Is that a fate that could await Tesla, do you think, as some startups like yourselves and others start to really push out into the market here?
I certainly believe that will be a trend for most of the Chinese consumer market. I think Chinese market, as you point out, like iPhone, maybe like Tesla, it's always first educated by expensive luxury segment products that educates Chinese consumer market what a high technology, good product looks like. But quickly, just like the smartphone market, you will have very high quality domestic players coming to market and really expand the segment. Doesn't mean that iPhone's not successful. iPhone's super successful in China, but at the same time, the arrival of Chinese domestic brand at a high quality and affordable prices will ultimately expand the market to where it become.
What is your sense of how much pressure is on the Chinese consumer at this point as the economy slows?
Well, I think the consumer sentiment is something to watch, and also the auto sale decline is something that's quite significant, I would say. However, what we also see at the same time is that the new energy vehicle segment is growing at a very fast clip. Every month you see year-over-year growth about 80% or so. So that's actually very, very impressive. So I think in contrast to the auto market, I think EV is still enjoying a growth rate that's unrivaled at the moment.
That was XPeng CFO Brian Gu. Coming up, can the HR industry be transformed by the cloud? One startup is betting on it. We're going to speak with the CEO of Namely next. This is Bloomberg. For many that run an office, HR operations are one of the biggest headaches in the workplace. But can technology streamline how HR works? Namely thinks so and offers a cloud-based platform for small and mid-sized businesses. The company says that 75% of their clients say Namely has increased employee engagement, and the majority also say the platform has made their employees more productive. As part of our work shifting series, I want to welcome Namely CEO Elisa Steele. Elisa, thank you so much for being here.
Hi.
So what sets your software apart?
Well, our software is so different because it's a full solution for a mid-sized company. Mid-sized companies have very small HR departments, but they have the same problems as a big enterprise. They have to manage their workforce, they have to drive employee engagement, they have to understand data and insights, and Namely puts that all together in a one-stop shop in a really easy package for them to understand and use. At the same time, we provide a really engaging platform directly for the employees.
So are you competing with folks like Zenefits, Gusto, Workday, or are you competing with old school HR?
Yeah, those companies do similar things, but target on different customers. We're really targeted on that mid-sized company, about 100 to 1,000 employees, who are trying to manage that full suite. So usually it's a competitive situation of they haven't really adopted tech yet, and they have this opportunity to now modernize the workforce.
Now, what's interesting about HR is that you are at a sort of critical entry point where employees are coming into the organization. You're also managing employees throughout the organization. And as we talk about issues of sort of bias in the corporate world, in general, HR can play a critical role, as well as technology that HR representatives use. Is that something that you're thinking about?
Yeah, it's actually one of our newest and most popular products with our customer, where we provide data and insights to help them understand their workforce and benchmark that against all of our other clients so that they understand, how are we faring? How are we faring on pay equity? How are we faring on diversity? How are we doing in promotional opportunities for our people? And they can look at that in the context of Namely data and give themselves a scorecard.
Talk to us about some of the biggest hurdles when it comes to modernizing HR and creating an HR workforce for sort of the modern world.
Well, typically HR has been in a function that hasn't been able to be measured very well.
And often it's not prioritized.
And true in mid-sized companies. They usually have a department of one, maybe two if they're lucky. But like I said, they have the same problems as a big enterprise. They're trying to manage a workforce, drive engagement, retain their talent, attract talent. So having a solution that combines technology and the human beings of talent is really, really important for their success.
So I have to ask, you stepped into this role a few months ago. You'd just done a massive funding round. The CEO was apparently pushed out after an investigation that showed actions inconsistent with what is expected of Namely leadership. What can you tell us about what happened there?
Well, Namely is a very strong cultural value system, and when we have any employee that has behavior that doesn't align with that, they don't really have a place at the company. And unfortunately, that happened with our CEO, and I was on the board at the time and stepped in, fell in love with the company, the product, and our customers, and I'm happy to say that I'm there now as the CEO.
All right, Elisa Steele, CEO of Namely, thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily,
for stopping by. Still ahead, earnings season is right around the corner. Netflix kicks it off with its report out after the bell Tuesday. What you can expect next. This is Bloomberg. Supermarket sweepstakes, yes, they still exist, and now apparently more than ever. People are being more cautious about filling out any information to avoid being part of a scam. Bloomberg Tech senior executive editor Brad Stone recently experienced winning a Whole Foods sweepstakes that he didn't even enter. This story is insane. Tell us what happened.
Right. Well, Emily, we often talk about Amazon, and I just
you write about Amazon.
And I write about Amazon.
A whole book about Amazon.
And I have colleagues that report about Amazon that I work with very closely. And it was actually on my way to visit them when I get a call from a guy introducing himself as Max from Amazon Whole Foods, saying that I won a sweepstakes, $10,000 in Whole Foods gift cards. Now, the irony is that I just assumed it was a fraud. And our colleagues in Seattle, who I was going to visit, assumed that it was a fraud. And then I confirmed with the company that, no, this was real, and this is a practice that all supermarkets still do engage in.
But hang on, even someone at Amazon told you they thought that this probably wasn't real. It just sounded too good to be true.
I actually asked my tax preparer for advice about how to handle it, and I couldn't get him to engage because he thought it was fake. And so, yes, there's a difficulty in running these kinds of promotions in the modern day of robocalls and spam emails. Nobody believes that they're real.
So, hang on. Amazon and Whole Foods actually are giving away $10,000 gift cards to customers. How are they choosing these winners?
That's right, because I was confused because I hadn't actually entered into any contest. But apparently, if you use the Amazon Visa card in a Whole Foods, then you qualified for the drawing. Now, I asked this guy, I called him back, and I said, what are the odds of winning this? And he said, astronomical. So, yeah, it's unclear to what to what extent that's a successful promotion, because I never saw that they were promoting it inside Whole Foods, and certainly never entered it, and yet for a while was the fortunate winner.
So what are the odds of a tech reporter who covers Amazon winning this?
And I should say I did not accept the prize, so yes. Lunch is not on me for the rest of the week. I thought it would be a bad idea to take it and passed it along, so there was some other lucky winner in my place.
That is a bummer. That is a bummer for you. So, speaking of, the broader issue here, I mean, is Amazon having a problem with getting more people into Whole Foods? I mean, is there an issue with traffic? Why offer something like this? It seems very un-Amazon.
It does. So I called the lawyer who specializes in these kinds of contests, and he said all supermarkets do it, that there is a percentage of consumers out there who sort of obsessively enter these things. It's a great way for any retailer to not only bring more people into stores, but also compile a database of sort of active customers. So there's some sort of, there's some other reasons for it. I think, it's very un-Amazon-like. I think that they prefer to spend money on lowering prices and increasing customer service. And it's probably a kind of residual thing that Whole Foods has done for many years.
There was some fine print in the contract, I believe, that made you a little uneasy. I mean, should the customers who are winning this $10,000 be concerned at all?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it depends on who you are. There was something in the language that I saw where they reserved the right to use the winner's likeness and name in promotions, and so I had a vision of my smiling face with a kale salad on the wall of my local Whole Foods and thought, I'm not ready for that kind of exposure. But other than that, no. I mean, I think, it's for the right person. It's probably a great fortune.
Yes, and unfortunately, we're not going to see a life-size poster of Brad Stone in Whole Foods. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that one with us, Brad. Bloomberg Tech Senior Executive Editor Brad Stone. Well, tech earnings seasons gets into full swing tomorrow with Netflix kicking it off for the FANG stocks. Earnings coming fresh off Disney's recent salvo into the content streaming space. To discuss what we might expect, I'm going to bring in Bloomberg's Cameron Leach in New York. So, Cameron, what are we expecting for Netflix?
Well, this quarter is not a typical quarter for Netflix. Since Netflix last reported, there's been about 4 new entrants into the TV, to the pay TV, to the internet TV streaming industry. And so now we're going to need some confidence from Reed Hastings just to say, is everything going to be all right going forward? Now, this quarter seems like it's going to be pretty much in line with subscriber estimates. Analysts are expecting about 7.3 international paid streaming ads for international and 1.6 domestically. But the real issue that investors will be looking at is guidance. It seems like it will be softer with a lighter content slate for next quarter, and also because there's an increase in prices also.
How are analysts reacting since Disney unveiled their plans? We did get a fair amount of details with Disney plans, less details with Apple's plans, but this is the first time that Netflix will be reporting now that we have more information about what some of these other competitors are doing.
Well, we've seen a steep drop-off in Netflix's market cap since last week's announcement of Disney Plus. Now, a lot of investors short-term investors at least, seem to be worried. But for the long term, it seems like investors are very confident that Netflix still remains at the top of the throne. Now, you have Disney Plus that's going to bring a pretty big IP and content library that includes Marvel and the Pixar, given the 21st Century Fox deal. But analysts seem to be pretty much okay with what's going forward. Now, the problem is, what is going to happen for Netflix coming up? Now, Disney is going to be a pretty big competitor to Netflix, but we'll see what Netflix can do based on the earnings call tomorrow.
All right, now, you used the word throne, and I assume the pun was unintended, but Game of Thrones premiered last night.
Yes.
The first episode of the final season, HBO saying that 17.4 million people watched it, which is more than the previous record. Of course, HBO has been going through some turmoil of its own. The CEO has left after, AT&T absorbed Time Warner. How much competition, how much are Netflix analysts these days worried about HBO, which has been on the throne,
and I'm glad you mentioned that. That is something that analysts are looking forward to for the second. And that's part of the reason why second quarter numbers are pretty much soft when we wind up looking at the earnings tomorrow. It's going to be a lighter content slate, and analysts seem to be to agree that a lot of people are watching Game of Thrones this season, and it doesn't seem that Netflix has a pretty strong content slate. They have Kevin Hart's Irresponsible Tour streaming on the network down, but it doesn't seem like that's going to drive people away from Game of Thrones. And who knows, will Cersei stay at the top, or will it be Arya?
So what about the longer term outlook for Netflix, regardless of who sits on the Iron Throne? What are analysts looking at, let's say a year out, once, Disney and Apple presumably have launched?
By the time that Disney and Apple launches later in the year around November, it looks like Apple may be ahead of Disney when it comes to their launch. But it seems that Netflix investors are pretty much okay with what's happening. They feel like the OTT streaming industry, there's an uptick there. So they're happy with the increased competition because it's driving people away from traditional broadcasts.
All right, Bloomberg's Cameron Leach, thanks so much for that update. Of course, we're going to be all over Netflix results as they come out. I've got the Game of Thrones theme song playing in my head. That will play us out. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Remember, we will be all over Netflix tomorrow. We'll have instant reaction and analysis. Be sure to tune into that. And as always, we're live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.